has said, I want to address God. I want to talk to him. I want to set the record straight so he isn't making the mistake that I deserve this when I don't. Elihu, he takes a slightly different approach, but he basically says, no, this is God bringing justice on you, but it's for something that is in you that's hidden. He's bringing it out in order to correct it. So there's all these different views, and Elihu is probably the closest. But what we know from the prologue of Job, chapters 1 and 2, Job was a righteous man. Job didn't bring this on himself. God isn't punishing Job. But from Job's perspective, they're all assuming it's God's punishment. So now, we finally get to the spot where God addresses Job. And what do you hope you find out at this point? If you're Job, what are you hoping for?
What did I do? Why?
Yeah. Don't you want God to give a clear explanation? Why is this happening? And just stop for a moment and consider from Job's perspective. All my children were killed. Many of my servants were killed. My flocks were destroyed. My camels were stolen. My way of transporting my goods, they were all stolen. So all these things. And Job has done nothing but try to have a relationship with God. Well, Job is asking why. And that's the right question. He sees all these errors in the reasoning. He doesn't know the answer, and some of his assumptions are wrong. But one of the places he gets to is, I would like to make my case before God. I think I would be acquitted if I could make my case before God. And really, that's what Job is doing. So I want to read a couple of scriptures here in Job. I want to read Job 31. This will be Job 31:35. So here Job says, "Oh, that I had one to hear me. Behold, here is my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. And the indictment which my adversary has written, surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it to myself like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince I would approach him." So here he's talking about that I have signed my affidavit of innocence. Now let me take this to God and let him answer me for it. So that's what Job is saying. This is what I would like God to do. And so that's his demand. I want to look at one other scripture. This is Job chapter 13, verse 22. And Job says, "Then call and I will answer, or let me speak, then reply to me. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make known to me my rebellion and my sin. Why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? Will you cause a driven leaf to tremble or pursue dry chaff? For you write bitter things against me and make me to inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You set a limit for me, for the soles of my feet, while I am decaying like a rotting thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. Man who is born of a woman is short-lived and full of turmoil. Like a flower he comes forth and withers. He also flees like a shadow and does not remain. You also open your eyes on him and bring him into judgment with yourself. Who can make the clean out of the unclean? No one. Since his days are determined, the number of his months is with you, and his limits you have set so that he cannot pass. Turn your gaze from him, that he may rest until he fulfills his days like a hired man." So here he's taking the idea of you are focused on me. I'm not even doing anything bad. I'm a weak man. I'm about to die. And yet you continue to turn your gaze against me. You continue to pursue me. You continue to strike me for everything that I do wrong. And I am not worth your time in this way. So that's kind of his thing. And so I want to ask you some questions you need to answer. You need to tell me what my iniquities are, that you're going to turn against me and watch me in this way, waiting for me to stumble, waiting for me to do wrong so you can strike at me at that moment. Just look away from me and let me die. That was here in Job 13. That's kind of the idea. Is just look away from me and let me die. Mike?
I think this is the same situation. Being in that situation, how would you think anything else but that you were being punished? I mean, now we know that that wasn't the case because we have God's perspective on it after the fact. But in this life, if we're going through something that is a real big challenge of some, I mean, I think it's kind of a natural thing to think that, man, I'm getting beat up here. So I don't know. I don't see how anybody could think anything different than how Job was thinking, was that, especially knowing that he was a righteous man.
Yeah, no, and so this is where everybody's mind is some form of punishment, some form of an attempt at justice. His friends agree, they just don't know why. Job disagrees because he doesn't know why it would be a punishment. But the thing that Job did, and what we'll see in God's answers. In fact, let's just look at that real quick. Look at the beginning of chapter 38 real quick. We see God make a statement to Job. Here it says, the Lord answers, this is 38 starting in verse 1. Then the Lord answers Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without wisdom? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask, and you instruct me. So here the first thing he says, who is this who darkens counsel with words without wisdom? So here God's accusation, and what he's going to address is, you spoke on my behalf without any reason to say it. You spoke words, but they're without knowledge. And we'll get to this in a moment. But this is the accusation everybody's been making against each other when they disagree. But now God answers Job. And this is really one of the main points that Elihu makes against Job, is you're speaking words, but they're without wisdom. But that's one of the areas where God corrects Job. You're speaking out of place. You can't, you are acting as if your knowledge is somehow equivalent to my knowledge. And so you're speaking big words. I think it's the movie Top Gun, where his captain says, your ego's writing checks your body can't cash. That's what God says to Job. Your ego's writing checks your body can't cash. You're speaking these big words, but there's no substance to back them up. So that's the first thing God corrects Job on. If we go to chapter 40, God says, will the fault finder, this is 40 verse 1, then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. So the second thing that God addresses from Job is that Job thought he could reprove God, that he would make a correction and God would change. So that's the second thing that God answers. Now the interesting thing about this, does God ever say to Job, does Job ever get the answer, here's why this happened to you? He never gets that answer. I find that interesting, is no one makes demands of God. And have you ever heard, in fact, when I was a kid, the preacher at my church, I don't particularly like this, but this is what he did, is if I asked a question, instead of giving me an answer, he'd make me come up with the answer. And sometimes I just couldn't, but that's what he would do. He would sit there, so I'd ask a question in class, and he'd be like, okay, what about this? What do you know about this? What do you know? And instead of answering my question, he would just ask me a bunch of questions. But that's a teaching tool. Jesus would do the same thing. Here, we have a question. Well, I have a question for you. That's what good teachers do. And that's one of the things we see in this is God is taking the role of a teacher. And really as a father, one of the tone of this is ironic and sarcastic. To some extent, it's ironic and sarcastic. Look in 38 verse 21, and you'll see, you know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. He's asking about creation. And then he says, tell me about creation, Job. Since you know, since the number of your days are so great, since you were there in the creation too, tell me about creation. That's a sarcastic kind of question. So when I started doing dirt work when I was 17, and I had done it. I was probably in my mid-30s. I hired this guy named Sojay. And he was a hard worker, but he had never been around construction before. And so this was like in his first month of working there. We were backfilling a hole, and we have to, in public right-of-way, you got to compact it so it doesn't sink later. So I tell him, okay, you use the compactor, pack in the hole. He looks at me and is like, that'll never work. I was like, what? And he's like, that'll never work. If I do that, there won't be enough dirt. And I just said, Sojay, do you think I'd have told you to do it if I didn't think it would work? You know, he had no experience, and I had probably 15 years of experience. And I asked a sarcastic question, and then he did it, and he found out, hey, you know, the same amount of dirt that came out of the hole, it went right back in just fine, you know, because, and so anyway, but I asked a sarcastic question. Do you think I'd have told you to do it if I didn't think it would work? The answer is, just do what I told you. You don't know anything yet. And that's really what's going on here. So, but sometimes that's the way you instruct people, is you use sort of, in fact, this is just a joke that someone had told me, but they were saying, I noticed in the 5 love language they didn't include my love language, which is sarcasm and put downs. But you know, but it's that sort of a thing. Is sometimes asking questions where the answer is obvious and obviously steers your thoughts in one direction is a way of teaching, and that's what God does here as He begins to address Job's concerns. But He never says, here's why. He never gives that answer. Instead, He puts some things on Job's plate to ponder. Some pretty grand things. Some things that are obvious, but then also some things that seem like minutia. It just seems like small details. And I think all this works together. So let's ask this question. Who's talking? It says the Lord answers Job out of the whirlwind. Who's talking? This word Lord, do you notice in your Bible how it's written in all caps? So here, there's only one other place before this chapter where the word Yahweh is used in the book. I think Elihu uses it. But here we're starting to call God by His name, Yahweh. So Yahweh, it's not just a God or Elohim, the plural of deity. This is God. God answers. Who is the creator? Jesus, right. Look with me in John chapter 1 and verse 1 through 4. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through Him, and apart from Him nothing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. So nothing came into being. So as Yahweh is speaking to Job, what's He saying? I created things. And what I would say is I would identify this as the pre-carnate Jesus before He became man. Alexander Campbell, one of the guys kind of started the Restoration movement that the Church Church of Christ in America came from. He made a distinction. He called Jesus, the pre-carnate Jesus, the Logos. And then after He became incarnate, became flesh, He called Him the Son. So He made that distinction. But that's kind of what the Logos here is, the one who's addressing Job. It's the Creator addressing him from the world. And I just find that just kind of an interesting thing where maybe to a small extent, Job saying, I want an intercessor. He got the same intercessor we get. And so the Creator speaks to him out of the world. And I don't think that that's real critical to understand in the book. I just find, from a Christian perspective, that is an interesting element to when you just think of who's speaking here. And so now, I want to look at, before we get started on this, I want to look at a couple more scriptures. And this deals with the accusation, darkens counsels without knowledge. Look in chapter 34, verse 35. Here is Elihu's response to Job. He says, Job speaks without knowledge and his words are without wisdom. Job ought to be tried to the limit because he answers like wicked men, for he adds rebellion to his sin and claps his hands among us, and multiplies his words against God. Now, this is what Elihu accused Job of, and he said, this is particularly repulsive to me that you did this. God is a little bit more gentle, but this is one of the things that God says, Job, you were out of line when you did this. You know, you thought that you could speak against me, and that would be okay. And this just gives us the idea of God is higher than us. God is greater than us. God is wiser than us. And that's really the answer. When we start seeing these questions, that's what we're answering, is God is wiser, He's greater, He is... but not only is He wiser and greater, He, even in small things, He's greater and wiser. So that's what He's going to be getting at in a lot of the questions He asked Job. Then I want to look forward in 35 verse 16, similar accusation by Elihu. It says, so Job opens his mouth emptily, and he multiplies words without knowledge. So again, here you see this accusation, Elihu. And I think Elihu is, well, I know Elihu is on track because God repeats that exact same phrasing, validating Elihu's concern to Job. So now let's look in Job chapter 38. And what do you want to ask God is what we're going to, is what would you want to ask God? And you might say, okay, why is this happening? Why am I suffering? Why are all these things? But God doesn't answer that question. He asks some questions. And what's the answer to these questions? And it's almost like you want, as you read this, you guys could answer the questions. But when the answer to the question is, Lord, you can, or do. So that's the answer. When God asks the question, Job, can you? What does Job respond? Lord, you can. Lord, you do. And so over and over again. So as we read this, I want you in your mind to fill in the blanks. When you hear a question, here's the answer. Lord, you can. Lord, you do. And that helps to follow what Job is saying here. So let's go ahead and begin. I want to just begin. Well, I'll start reading in 38 verse 1 again. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask, and you instruct me. So, how would you like God to say this to you? You know, you just kind of, let's just get our little perspective. So here's Job, and here's the whirlwind, right? And then Job is standing, and this voice is coming out of a whirlwind. So maybe there's some storm clouds, a tornado. He's standing out there. How loud is a tornado? Fairly loud. And there's this voice that's overcoming the noise of the tornado. And later he's going to say, can you speak like thunder, Job? Which gives you the impression God is speaking like thunder. And so that's our scenario here. Now he says, gird up your loins. Do you know what gird up your loins means? So back in the day...
Put on your big boy boots.
What? Put on your big boy boots, yeah. Back in the day, they would wear like a robe kind of a thing. And when you're going to work, you'd pull it up and you'd like tie it around your waist and you'd get it short. So you could move your legs like Elijah gird up his loins and outrun the chariot. That was the sort of thing. It was just a way to make your clothes functional for working. But that's kind of get ready to go to work, Job. Or another way of saying it is like Larry said, put on your big boy boots. You know, time to man up. I will ask you, you instruct me. So this is not the way you want God to begin talking to you. But let's pay attention to let's start reading. What's he asking him? Tell me if you have understanding. Verse 5. Who sets it, or verse 4. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who sets its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth it went out from the womb? When I made a cloud as its garment, and thick darkness as its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt and doors. And I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther, and here your proud waves shall stop. So here, I like in this, he's like, where were you? Can you do this? But then he goes on in this section, he doesn't do this in every section, but in this section he says, when I did this. And there's some things he mentions. I just find this is very poetic. So that's an aspect of this. It's just a very poetic way of saying things. But it's also, the poetry carries some elements of truth in it. God set a boundary for the ocean. He says, you can go this far and no further. We can watch that. When I go to the beach, that's what crosses my mind. This far and no further. It doesn't mean there's not events, but the ocean tends to stay. When people start talking about the sea levels rising and the oceans flooding over everything, does that agree with this? So that's one of those things where, from a biblical, from what God says here, is he's like, I did set a boundary there. We don't know precisely where it's at, but he says that's what I did, and I locked its door. I can't go anywhere. I put clouds as its garments and swaddled it. Were you there what gave birth to the ocean, Job? Now that would have never crossed my mind. It came gushing forth. Where did it come gushing forth from? And he's just saying, it was like an infant to me. But for you, you have no idea. Verse 12. Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? Here's the image of this, just to kind of give you a picture. Have you ever, shaken a carpet out? You take it and you shake it outside. That's the picture here. The wicked are all over the earth, and then in the morning, God sends the light. He's like, I command the dawn, and I grab its corners and shake it, and the wicked just go flying. Right? Because the wicked like nighttime. So that's how God, imagine, it's just like shaking out a blanket. The way you shake out a blanket, Job, I shake out the morning. I shake out the dirt from the night. So it's just kind of an interesting image that God brings up there. Verse 16. 14, yeah. It's changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. Have you ever entered the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? This is interesting right here. This particular piece of knowledge, no one could have known. They had no scuba diving back in those days. In fact, they had very limited seafaring. So how would they know there were fountains in the deep? How could anyone say this with certainty? So this is just kind of one of those things where you say, was the Bible written by God? What would you expect to find if it was truly inspired? You would expect to find things that God would know and no one else would know. The future, things about the earth revealed in this particular fact. We didn't even know until probably more modern history that there were fountains of the deep in this way. And yet, in the time between Abraham and the Exodus, someone wrote that down, that there was fountains in the deep. So it was way advanced knowledge for that time and period of history. Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Oh, so the depths of that, all this is talking about, in ancient days they believed Sheol and death and Hades and all those things were down at the bottom of the ocean. So they just think, it's so deep, no one could get there, that's got to be where they all are. So when he starts talking about, have you seen the fountains of the ocean? Have you been down in the deeps? Have you seen the gates of death? That's speaking to the idea of that's where all the dead people go. You can't go there. Or can you tell me about that? Have you ever been down there before? Verse 18. Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. He's like, stop me if I'm talking about things you know about. Do you know how big the world is? Have you seen the whole world, Job? Stop me if you know. I mean, I don't want to repeat myself. If I've told this story before, you don't, that sort of a thing. But he's like, stop me if you know. Where is the way of the dwelling of the light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for a time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east wind scattered on its earth? Who has cleft a channel for the flood, or a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on the land without people, or on a desert without a man in it, to satisfy the waste in the desolate land, and to make the seed of the grass sprout? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb has come the ice, and the frost of the heaven? Who has given it birth? Water becomes hard like stone, and the surface of the deep is imprisoned. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of the Orion? Can you lead forth a constellation in its season, and guide the bear with her satellites? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, or fix their rule over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, so that an abundance of water will cover you? Can you send forth lightnings, that they may go, and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom? Okay, I want to stop right there. And so he's asking all these questions. But stop and think, what kind of things is he talking about? Rain, ice on the ocean, the movement of the stars, the purpose of the movement of the stars, which is interesting. But he's just going through all these different things. Are these grand things? Some of them, right? I mean, he's like, the stars don't move. They are chained up. Can you loosen those chains? Can you shift the position of them if you want to? No, I can't do that. Do you know who gave birth to the snow? That's just a weird question in my view, but I mean, maybe that's how they thought about that. Where does it come from? Who makes it? Do you know anything about that? Well, no, I don't know about that. Do you know about this? How common is weather?
Very common.
Very common. It's like right? It's either sunny or rainy or snowy or windy or maybe all four. But around here, I've heard that, but I've seen it also. And so you have all those different things happening, and it's like, it's common. It's no big deal. Like if the way it goes from, you walk into a store, it's raining, you walk out and it's blue skies, you're like, what happened? I don't have anything it's so common. It's so mundane. And yet, there is nothing I can do about it. And this is where God is going with this. It's common, it's mundane, there's nothing I can do about it. And then he says, what about the deserts that need water from time to time? Do you look after those, Job? Do you remember to send water there? That's kind of, do you remember to water the deserts from time to time? I do. I think about that. I notice that. Do you? He's just, did you know that this particular star indicates... here's just an interesting thing. I don't know if it's true or not. I just found this intriguing. I was listening to a guy. They were talking about when Jesus had said the men of the east saw his star rise. So they were astronomers and they paid close attention to the stars. And the Pleiades, I believe, was the constellation that is associated with Israel. And they were saying around 7 to 6 BC, Saturn, which is the heavenly body associated with kings, rose and went into the Pleiades. And that would have been around that same time period. And they said that may have been the star, because the men, they were from the east, and it says they saw the star rising in the east. And so they would have had to travel west to get there. But to me, that was just intriguing that particular constellation, the king star, was in Israel at that time period, and so someone was speculating. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought it was interesting. But I wonder if God does that stuff. I don't know. I know the stars are there for signs of times and things, but we don't know what. But that's kind of the idea is, do you understand why things happen, the timing of things, how it all works that way? Do you understand? I sure don't. I wish I did. Maybe one day I will. Maybe if I still care about that when I get into heaven, I'll be able to ask God about those things. And maybe he'll ask me a bunch of questions when I do. I don't know. But it's kind of an interesting element to all this. Is he's just saying there are so many things you don't know, Job. You don't even begin to understand all I do. Verse 36. I like this particular question here. Who's put wisdom in the innermost being and given understanding to the mind? Now, this is an argument that I believe Job made. That God's the one who put wisdom in the innermost being, and yet you're speaking without wisdom. Anyway, I think this is an argument that Job was making, and now God turns that around. Who did that? Who gave men wisdom? Like that is, if you're going to say what makes men outstanding among other creatures that are created, one of the things is consciousness and wisdom, and so our ability for speech. There's actually it is a ancient. We think of humanism as humans are like naturalism or that sort of a thing, but the ancient view of humanism was really, here are the things that God gave man that set him apart from the beasts. Language, intellect, there's writing, a few things like that. There's like 5 things. But that's kind of the idea, is here's what makes man unique, and I did that for man. So that's where he's beginning with this. But then he's going to talk about some other things that man can't do that God put into these other kinds of creatures. Verse 36, who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or given understanding to the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom, or tip the water jars of the heaven, when the dust hardens into a mass and the clods stick together? So here he says, now I gave you wisdom, Job, but can you count the clouds with all your wisdom? They're always moving. Who knows how many clouds there are, right? Can you, with all your wisdom, cause it to rain? Can you, with all your wisdom, soften hardened earth, stop a drought, that sort of a thing? No. I gave it to you. That's the point. I made you wise, but there's a limit to your wisdom, Job. I can do things you can't do. And then he says, with your wisdom, can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of young lions when they crouch in their dens and lie in wait for their lair? No, you can. See, you can't feed lions. You can't help lions with getting their prey, because they're better at you than that. And that's the idea, is I made lions capable to do what lions do. I made you able to do what you do, but you can't do what they do. 41, who prepares the raven its nourishment when its young cries to God and wander about without food? Did Jesus talk about this? Didn't Jesus say God feeds the ravens and the birds? If he cares about them, he cares about you. That's the same idea here. Is I look after the ravens. Are birds a big deal? I mean, the grand scheme of things, does a bird change anything? Maybe lots of birds, but one bird, I've been driving down the road and hit a bird before. Nothing changed, right? Some other bird got food or something like that, but I didn't even slow down. Nothing changed. In fact, I think I was stuck to the grill in my truck. So I had to take it off. But the thing is a few birds don't make they don't make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. But does God use his wisdom and ability to provide for those birds? The baby ravens that cry out to God. That's how he says it. Isn't that an interesting thing? Isn't that mundane for God to be paying attention to? Isn't that a small thing? 39. These are small things. Do you know the time mountain goats give birth? I have no idea. Maybe if I was a hunter, I might have an idea. Do you observe the calving deer? Have you ever seen have you ever just happened to be out and see a deer give birth? Probably not many people have. It's kind of like have you ever seen there's certain animals you'd think you'd see dead ones everywhere. But you never find just things dead lying around. They're always gone. They're always somewhere else. It's just, but we don't know any of that stuff. Do you observe the counting of the days? 39:2. Can you count the months they fulfill? Or do you know the time they give birth? They kneel down, they bring forth their young, they get rid of their labor pains. Their offspring become strong, they grow up in the open field, and they leave and do not return with them. So here's the birth thing. They have their babies and they keep going. The babies grow up and they leave their parents. Nobody tells them to do it. They just do. Do you know anything about that? That's just the question. And what about the wild donkeys? And this is just an interesting element, is wild donkeys. Well, they're untamable. In fact, Ishmael was said he was going to be a wild donkey of a man. But one of the things you think is his mother was a slave who was abused. They get free from that situation, and Ishmael had to watch his mother be abused, and now she's free. And it says he is going to be the kind of person who will never give up his freedom. And that's what a wild donkey is. That disposition, God says, I gave the wild donkey that disposition. I did that on purpose. Isn't that just interesting to think about? Some of these are really, to me, you think about, why did God do what he did? And then you say, did he do it on purpose? Yeah, that's on purpose. The donkeys are the way they are on purpose. And who loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I gave the wilderness for a home, and the salt land for his dwelling place. He scorns at the tumult of the city. The shoutings of the driver he does not hear. He explores the mountains for his pasture, searches after every green thing. So that's what the wild donkeys do. Will the wild ox consent to serve you, or will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in furrows with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you trust him with his great strength and leave your labor to him? Will you have faith in him that he'll return to your grain and gather it from the threshing floor? So here he's saying, can you even train a donkey? Can you even train this big cow? Right, the wild ox. It's basically a cow. Can you train that strong animal to work for you? And just start thinking about, I want to correct and reproach God. Wait a minute, let's start with a donkey. Can you train a donkey? Okay, he won't listen to you. What about an ox? No, he won't listen to you. What can you do? Like, you want to reproach me. You have some things that you're not considering before you consider reproaching God. Verse 13. The ostrich wings flap joyously with pinions and plumage of love. For she abandons her eggs to the earth and warms them with dust. And she forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may trample them. She treats her young cruelly, as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, she is unconcerned, because God has made her forget wisdom, and he has not given her a share of understanding. So Mason has this theory, or me and Mason have this theory, that chickens can't survive in the wild, they're too dumb. And so they need to be domesticated. So we joke about that, is just chickens can't be wild. You never heard of a wild chicken. Maybe you have, but that's what we joke about. They're too dumb. But you know what? That's what God is saying here. I made an ostrich a dumb animal. He's like, I made it that way. He's like, I didn't overlook. I just made it dumb. And he's like, I did that on purpose. But now listen to the next thing. Verse 18. When she lifts herself on high, she laughs at the horse and its rider. I made an ostrich dumb, but she can outrun a horse. She's fast. That's her gift. I didn't give her smarts, but I gave her speed, and she can outrun anything. And so that's her pride. Now, think about Job thinks he has wisdom. But God's saying, there's things I decided not to give wisdom to. There's things I give other things to. But I'm the one doing all of this, and you don't even have a chance. You don't even understand that I'm doing this. Verse 19. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Did you make him leap like a locust? His majestic snorting is terrible. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. And he does not turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the flashing spear and javelin. With shaking and rage, he races over the ground. He does not stand still at the voice of the trumpet. As often as the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" And he scents the battle from afar, and the thunder of the captains and their war cry. So here he's describing a horse. And it's interesting. I grew up riding horses, and my horse, he was an Arab quarter horse cross, and he was fast. But he would not let another horse beat him. Like, he'd start walking faster. If the other horse started walking, he'd keep it a little bit faster, and he'd just break into a gallop. And it was hard to stop him. I basically had to just turn him in circles because we ran him all the time. And we basically just had to turn him in circles to get him to stop because he wouldn't stop otherwise. Like, he wanted to run. But he was fearless. And there were times, like one time we were running, and I watched the man from Snowy River, how he'd run his horses down the hill. And I was running down a gravel hill, and we took a corner a little bit too fast and wiped out. I mean, we just totally wiped out. And it was painful for both of us. But he was not afraid. Like, if I told him to go faster, he would go faster. And it's just kind of interesting. You just kind of see this. But here it's like they love battle. Like, they're just so confident and so ready to just charge in. And God says, I gave him courage. I gave him fearlessness. I made him want to be a warrior, if you will. And those old war horses, they were brutal animals. They would stomp people. They were pretty vicious animals. And God says, I made the horse that way. Do you know anything about that? Did you know that horses were like that? 26, is it by your understanding that the hawk soars, stretching out its wings towards the south? How many of you have looked at a hawk and thought, I wish I could fly? It's amazing to watch birds fly. Like, my dad loved hawks. He'd always point them out. But it's just cool. I mean, how do they do it? We go watch the eagles for the same reason. It's fun to watch them dive in and catch fish. Like, it's pretty amazing. And he's like, do you know anything about that? And you just think about the design of God in what he did with animals. Is it at your command, verse 27, is at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest? On the lodge he dwells, on the cliff he dwells and lodges, upon a rocky crag in inaccessible places. From there he spies out his food, his eye sees it from afar. His young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is. So here's the last of it. But God says, or Job says, I want to contend with God. I want to set him straight. So God just starts asking these questions. Some of these things are about very mundane, normal things that are common to see, common to encounter and he says, can you tell me about that? Can you answer anything about that? Are you wise enough? And even in this day and age, we know a lot more. And Mark Beach mentioned, this is just something I never thought about this before, but he was working on a particular problem at his work. And he had commented that God already invented every possible technology. Just by making the materials and the way they work together, he knows the limit of anything we can do. He can solve those problems. I just had never considered that aspect of God, that when he made things, that he didn't just make an element, he knew every element, how it interacts. And what you could do with it, what the maximum thing you could do with all those things. He thought it all through. And how men are still struggling just to figure out small things about what God has done. And I feel like we have a lot of information, but we're just scratching the surface. And then to say, I want to instruct God. I think God makes his point fairly well. And so what's the answer then? If God does something, what's the answer? What's the answer Job needs to draw? All the answers to the questions is, Lord, you can, Lord, you can, Lord, you can. If I'm going to cause you to suffer, Lord, you can. I mean, that's the answer. Do you need to understand it? You can't understand. You can't comprehend the Lord. You can't comprehend it. And so really the question is, what it comes around to is really, do you trust me with your life? Do you trust me with your well-being? Do you trust that I can look after you in a right, wise way? Are you willing to let me have that authority over your life? And that's really the question. This is to me, this is a fascinating answer. It is, when God told Adam, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the day you eat of it, you will surely die. Did he give an explanation? I mean, he said what would happen, but did he explain everything? Why did you put that tree there? Why does it need? Just take it away. That would be easier. Like, why would you do that? Like, you might have some questions about that. Someone says, I did this. Well, why did you do that? What is it like? God didn't give any explanation. He just said, don't do that. If you loved God, what do? He didn't explain it, but I trust you. Certainly. You wouldn't do anything harmful to me. You wouldn't put a stumbling block in front of me. You wouldn't do it if there wasn't a reason for it. I love you, I trust you, I'll do it. That is the state that when you talk about the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, that's the state they exist in. They love each other. They yield to each other. They trust each other. They attempt to serve one another. That's your will. Okay, I'll do your will. I'm happy to give you what you want. I'm happy to defer to you. And they exist in perfect joy because of that. The perfect, it's the ultimate happiness is what the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit share. And God is saying to Job, would you like to join into that? Trust me. Let me act and know that I'm God. Know that I am not going to hurt you. I'm not going to put you, I will look after your well-being, the same as I look after everything else's well-being, the same as I put rain in deserts that you don't even know about, that no man knows about. I will look after you. And if there's something hard, that is me looking after you. And so he just, he really puts out the thing that we need is, are you willing, knowing who I am, seeing the way I deal with everything else, are you willing to entrust yourself to me? That's the real thing that God is getting at. And that's the thing we really need to hear. That's the challenge we really face. And the answer, that when you start answering that question, we start saying, well, there's a lot of reasons why I have a hard time trusting. But God says, just look around you and think about who I am. You'll never know the good I do. You'll never, I haven't given you the wisdom to be capable of knowing the good I do, but I have given you enough to know that I'm God. And so, that's the first answer. He doesn't say, here's why you suffered. But what he did say is, I am not, one of the accusations Job made against God, he's distant. He's hands off. He doesn't even care what goes on. The wicked prosper, the righteous suffer. God doesn't care. What did God answer? I do care. The smallest details I see to in an appropriate way. Are you willing to trust me? So that when Job says God doesn't care, he doesn't know, he's disconnected, God answers, no, I do care. I do know. I pay attention to these things. What I do with purpose and wisdom. And if you're going to trust anyone, can you trust me? And the answer is, okay, yeah, I trust you. We're close to the end of class, so I won't move into chapter 40. I didn't think I thought I might, but I didn't think I would. I feel like there's two ways to cover this. You can either go detail or you can go high level. But even on the high level, it's a little hard to go too fast. The rich young ruler, he comes up to Jesus and says, what do I need to do to enter into life? And he says, well, obey your parents, keep the commandments, do these things. I've done all those things since my youth. And I think it's in Mark where it says, and Jesus, having love for him, said to him, one thing you lack. Go, sell all your possessions, give it to the poor, and come follow me. How many of you would like that invitation? Come be... Maybe he was inviting him to be not just a disciple, but an apostle. But it said Jesus loved him. Jesus answered because he loved him. Here's what you need to do. And the man went away sad because he had many possessions. He turned down the opportunity. And what goes through his mind? This is not good for me. This is bad. I couldn't handle that. It's too much. He's trying to hurt me. That's the answer. When you walk away, when you know he's God, he calls him Lord, and he asks him what to do, and then he walks away. That is not good for me. You know what he's saying? I don't trust you to do what's right in my life. I would rather make my own decisions. I feel like I do that. I have a hard time trusting. You walk away from, here's what you need to do, but I don't do it. And that's a struggle. But what are you really saying is, I don't trust God. And it just made me, I was studying that and it just clicked with me. You know, we talk about, as a joke, we kind of joke about it, but don't pray for patience. You know, because something's going to happen that's going to make you have to be patient. And you don't want that, so don't pray for patience. What are you saying what's the sentiment behind that? I don't trust God to do that for me. Instead, I say pray for patience. Pray that God punishes you, disciplines you as you need it. Because do you trust Him? Pray not to be taken out from the situation that you're in, but pray that you have the strength to go through it. If it's your will, and really defer to the Lord's will on things. If you pray about it and it still happens, guess what? The Lord thinks that needs to be in your life. In fact, God doesn't really think anything. He doesn't have opinions. He just knows stuff. Whatever God knows is fact. So we pray about it. We don't know what God's working. And so if it's here, okay, that's something I need to go through. That would be how I would want to conclude this, is just, do you trust me? And that's a major question we ask, and maybe something to pray about. Lord, let me trust you. Help me to trust you. And the other aspect of this, and this is something to consider. Now, Job is God's answers are maybe tough for Job, but Job is an old wise man. This is how God needs to deal with Job. But you know what God is really doing here? He's teaching. Jesus was a teacher. Jesus would teach in a way that people could hear it and absorb it even before they clearly understood it. And so he spoke in parables and things like that. Partly it was to get into the hearts of people whose hearts were dull. They would hear that, and then maybe later they would understand the meaning behind it, and it would change their life. Jesus was wise in that way as a teacher. And instead of just saying, okay, now I will punish you, or not answering at all, or God came to him and addressed his concerns and taught him the way what he needed to hear instead of what he wanted to hear, and helped Job. I mean, God really helped Job with what he needed, and he was never punishing Job, and he never did punish Job. He corrected him, but his correction was in anticipation that Job would become better. Not that it would stumble him or anything like that. He just was bringing Job to the next level. He was, as Job said, refine me and I will be like gold. And that's really what God was doing with Job. But the thing is that's what God's doing with you in your life. the things we go through. God is refining us, and we don't know why. And we may never know why in this life, but the question still stands, and the question we need to ask ourselves and pray about is, can I trust God? Is God trustworthy to me? And it's a challenge sometimes to say yes, but that's the question, and that's what God puts before Job is, am I trustworthy to you? So, any thoughts or comments on that before we wrap it up for tonight? All right, let's close with a word of prayer.